My name is Dee Drell. I was born in New Orleans on November 4th, 1947. My parents were Theodore Lewis Drell Jr. and Annie D. Flynn Drell, and they married in 1935, I believe. And so I grew up there my whole life, and didn't leave there until I left and went in the service. So all my education was in the city of New Orleans. Attended various grammar schools, but then settled in at New Orleans Academy in the 8th grade, and went there 8 through 12, graduated from there, and then went on to Tulane, my favorite school for undergraduate and law school. So then the career all started, you know. You know, Tulane was always just, I think I was brought up on Tulane, although my brother went there and didn't finish, but that was the only real connection, except my dad just liked the school. And so I got to go to a number of Tulane football games. All of them were debacles, of course, in those days. It was a terrible football team, but I loved the school. And so I kind of suicided for Tulane and got in on an early decision program, and I did actually a combined degree while I was there. So I did the whole thing in 6 years, but I loved it. I started out in pre-med, supposedly. Well, there's no real pre-med curriculum, but you take a lot of science and things. And decided after my freshman year that that was not for me, and began to look at other things, including law school. Really had not thought about the law till that time. You know, New Orleans Academy was a military school at that time, and my mother used to live right behind the school, and she always wanted to send a son there. And so when the time came, I went to NOA, that's what it was called, NOA, and yeah, I have to say I really enjoyed the military aspect of it. So when I got to college, I pretty much was convinced I was going to go through ROTC, and I also felt like people should serve, you know, their country in uniform. I just did. And so I started Tulane and enrolled in ROTC, a 4-year program, and did all that and got commissioned after that. Commissioned actually a second lieutenant in the administrative branch of the Army, but I knew I was going to law school at that point. So then I became a JAG officer. I met my wife at Tulane, and her name is Suzanne Weber Drell now. She was Susie, and still is Susie, except sometimes I call her Suzanne and she likes it. She was a Chi Omega and I was a Pike, and we'd seen each other around campus for a while, and I really didn't start dating her until my senior year. But we sort of connected, you could say that, although it was an interesting courtship, because I was dating someone else. And then I found myself at ROTC summer camp in hot Fort Sill, Oklahoma during the summer. And the person I was thinking about was not the person that I was dating, but it was Susie. So she was also military sponsor, so she was the drill team sponsor, and I was the executive officer of the drill team. So we went around, and she traveled with us to Baton Rouge and other places where we did competitive drill. And so, as I say, we just connected. We were then engaged in February, pinned in February, engaged, and married the next August. That was that, just quick. Well, I'm a collector. I'm a collector by nature, and I think I've collected ever since I was about 5 years old with stamps. And everybody starts out with stamps and coins. And so from there, I really have collected things my whole life. Well, of course, I was a JAG officer at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was in the criminal side of things. Really enjoyed that. Started out as a defense counsel and moved up to prosecutor and then chief of military justice before I left before I left the service. And then it was while I was there that I decided I didn't want to go home to New Orleans. I had always thought I'd go home there and practice, simply because if you're from New Orleans, there isn't any other part of the world. And but I got away and really enjoyed a little smaller type town living in Columbus, Georgia. And so I came home on leave and decided, well, I want to go, I want to move to Alexandria. And I came home and I talked to Susie about it and had to pick her up off the floor, and she said she'd really like to do that. So I started interviewing here. And the first job that I got was with a very seasoned and eminent trial lawyer named Camille Gravel. He had a firm, and you know, a lot of things in your life are kind of serendipitous. I went and I interviewed several times and walked the streets of Alexandria to knock on doors, and I wasn't getting any bites, and I wasn't sure how that was going to work out, whether I was going to actually be able to get a job here. And then I did a second stop at Camille's office, and he had said, come back and see me, and I did. Just stopped in one day, and he said, you know, I wasn't going to hire anybody, but he said, I just feel good vibes. He said, so I'm going to hire you. So that was it, and here we are. I was there 6.5 years. Yeah, in 1981, I moved over to the firm of Gold, Little, Simon, Weems, and Bruiser here in Alexandria, and it's a firm that's still alive and going. Change of name several times along the way, and I was there from 1981 until I took the bench in 2003. So my practice there was quite varied. I started out doing insurance defense work, and I continued to do some criminal work because I like to do courts martial and things like that as a carryover. But then I got really, really busy with one particular client. Interestingly, when Judge Pappy Little took the bench from there, I inherited one of his clients, which was a small, at that time, small power line contractor. And that work, the guy who owned the company was quite an entrepreneur and a real mover, and he wanted to really build his business. And we wound up working together all those years to the point that my practice kind of moved into the business side of things. Contracts, negotiation of contracts, mergers, acquisitions, and all that sort of thing. We built that company together, and then I got into OSHA law and just all kinds of things related to the power line construction business. And it was almost full time just doing that. I knew that Judge Little was going to be vacating the bench here, and so my sister-in-law, who at that time was working in the Republican Party, said to me, if you want this federal judgeship, you need to get your application in. And I said, Beth, she was Beth Levy, Susie's sister, and I said, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. And so I went back to the office, and I was talking to another couple of lawyers about that conversation, and it was a young lawyer named Misty Antoon who said, Mr. Drell, you can't not put your name in. I said, well, okay. So I went in my office. At that time, you have to remember 9/11 had just happened. So Washington was in a mess. You couldn't send packages or letters to Washington because of the anthrax scare. So the White House had set it up for you to upload your resume right into the White House database. And so I did that. I just, I uploaded the resume and sent it up there, and I said, okay, I'm done. We'll see what happens. And I went home and I told Susie, okay, we're going to Washington and meet people, because I really was not a big politico. And so we did that, met folks along the way, and I didn't know anybody really high up. But we began to connect with some of the folks in, I call it high people in low places. They were the assistants, the people who were legislative liaisons in the political world and stuff like that. And they all, of course, had the ear of congressmen and senators. Well, there were several of us in competition for the slot for this, and so who knew? Everybody thought that they had it, you know. And I went up for interviews, had a couple of interviews with the White House, and in those days there was a group called the Louisiana Patronage Committee that would vet you locally, because we didn't have Republican senators at the time. And so this local group consisted of some of the members of the state Republican Central Committee and some other folks in the party. So I had to go around and meet all of those people as well. And you know, things just kind of began to snowball, and it looked like it might be possibly good, but there were several people, like I say, in competition for it. Went up to Washington, must have done okay on an interview, because they called me and said, we're going to elevate you to the next level. In other words, that means we're going to send the FBI out to interview people about you. And there were like 60 FBI agents who went out and did that background check at the time. Well, it's fascinating when your neighbors come up to you and say, hey, the FBI came to see me about you. Well, after a time, that was around August of 2002, and wasn't long after that I was nominated by the White House. And of course, that's the magic. Once you get nominated, if you don't blow it some kind of way on the other background checks that come after, you have a real shot. And so I was then confirmed the next spring, 2003, and took my oath in late April. Took the bench, and as they say, the rest they say is history, you know. For those who watch this at any given time, they may have heard of the Genus 6, which was a civil rights matter really up in Jena, racial matter, difficult case. A lot of people came in town from that, and there was a very large African American contingent who came into town to support the kids there. But there was a group of skinheads, basically called the Nationalist Movement, who also came to town and wanted to parade through the town with big guns, things like that. So I had to deal with those issues of gun management in a very difficult situation. It was a pretty interesting and fun case to do. Thanks. I took senior status in December, which doesn't mean that I'm changing what I'm doing at all. You all know, of course, that we have a shortage of judges right now, so my docket is very, very full. But when it finally does slow down, I have some other work that I want to do as a judge. I want to travel around to some of the other courts and help out. Particularly, I want to go down to the border and help those people out. You know, they have huge caseloads, and it's something I've felt a little guilty about, actually, just not having enough time to go and help out. So I'd like to do some of that. And I've given some thought to other avocations and just what I want to do. I have a full life with family and fun stuff, hobbies, and I want to travel more. We've had good intentions about travel, but work always seems to, get in the way there. So I've thought about a number of things, and I'm not sure where I'm going to land on the other parts, but I don't really plan to leave the bench anytime soon. The job of chief judge sort of devolved upon me. When I got on the bench, Judge Little said, you'll never be chief judge because it's a 7-year stint and you're too old to get it. There are too many people in front of you. But as things would have it, one person opted out, another one cut his time to 5 years, and so it wound up my turn. And so I took it. I decided to go ahead and take it, knowing that it was going to be probably a transitional time. It's really one of the reasons I kind of took it. I'm pretty good with transitions, and I call it crisis management. I do that pretty well. Well, it turned out to be bumpier than I thought, because we had a difficulty with one of my colleagues who then ultimately left the bench at the time, which created even more space. We are very shy of judges right now because of that. But you know, I feel good about it because we got through it. Nothing fell apart. We've slowed down a bit, and we have a lot of hole filling that we have to do along the way to kind of keep the system working. But I was able to come up with, you know, some methodologies to make that continue to happen along the way. So, you know, I left it feeling pretty good about it. It would be, don't forget to live your life well. The law is important, but most of these cases are going to get buried with your body. You have a lot of other more important things probably in your life than practicing law. And that may sound strange because I've done it almost 50 years. But loving your family, taking care of people, giving of yourself, those are the things that really matter.